You are all most welcome to the final evening of the Kerry Diocesan Mission. My name is Colette O'Doherty, and I work in the area of youth ministry for the Diocese as part of the pastoral team, and I'm delighted to be here again with you all. As I'm sure you all know by now, the theme of this year's mission is Peace be with you all. And these last few days, this theme has been reflected and discussed by each of our guest speakers within the topics of peace within ourselves, peace within our communities, and peace within our world. And we are delighted that over 700 of you have registered and joined us over the last few nights. Continuing this theme, we are delighted to welcome Gemma Mulligan to explore peace within our families. Gemma is the pastoral coordinator for the Diocese of Ossory. She holds a Master's in Theology from St. Patrick's Pontifical University in Maynooth, with a specialisation in the Bible and spirituality. Gemma is also trained in godly play, which she integrates into her pastoral ministry, particularly with children preparing for the sacraments, helping them to explore faith through story, wonder, and play. A native of Kilkenny City, she lives in the parish of Tullaroan, County Kilkenny, with her husband and 5 children. So, without further delay, I hand you now over to Gemma to explore the topic, Family, a Peaceful Place. And I remind you all, if during her talk you're prompted to clarify something or you want to ask a question, please do pop it into the question and answer box at the base of your screen. Thank you, and welcome, Gemma.
Thank you, Colette, and good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to be with you all, and peace be with you all. I am delighted to be here this evening, and I suppose before I begin my input, what I would like to say is I'm very conscious that when I'm talking about family or my experience, it is really my experience, I suppose, and I'm conscious that all of us are born into families. I was born into a family of a mum and dad, and I have 6 brothers and 5 sisters. So we're a huge family, which is pretty unusual. And I'm married, as Colette said, for the past 23 years to my husband, Paul, and we have 5 children. And I'm very conscious that that's my experience of family. And I know that each family, and we look at this as we go along, each family is very, very different, and families are made up in all kinds of combinations. So I'm just conscious of that when that I'm sharing out of my experience in that way. But I'm not going to be talking too much about my family and my life in that way. I will be focusing on, I suppose, what Scripture has to say to us about family and peace in the family. And also very much drawing on a document that Pope Francis wrote in 2016. He wrote The Joy of Love after a number of gatherings around family. And a synod was held on the family, and he wrote this reflection document. So it's called The Joy of Love, Love in the Family and Experiences and Challenges of Families. So I'll speak a little bit or a lot around that, and hopefully then I'll come to a place where we will all have a better understanding, hopefully, of maybe how to live in a peaceful way, or how families can be a place of peace. The theme is, as Colette said, family, a peaceful place. And there's a question mark there really for me, which I think is important, because a question mark is interesting in the sense that, we all know that sometimes families are not peaceful places. For some people, a family can be a place of great conflict and hardship and stress and disorder and all of those things. So even the Holy Family of Nazareth was not free from hardship. I mean, how Mary and Joseph began their life together was extremely challenging. and it was filled with great uncertainty, I'm sure, for them. Peace is something that every human heart longs for. And I know that over these evenings you have reflected on finding inner peace, becoming communities of peace, and working for a peaceful world. So tonight, as I say, we'll reflect a little bit on family, a peaceful place with a question mark. The family is the place in where we are formed, where ideally we learn how to love. It's the place where ideally we learn to forgive. We learn how to communicate, hopefully in a really good way. And it's also a place that we ought to feel that we belong and that we can feel safe. And belonging is a huge part of being a peaceful family, that each person feels that they have a place there. And it was interesting because I have my older children are in third level, and my eldest son is, I suppose, gradually moving away from home more and more, and he's working away at the moment. So he's not at home very much. And there's great demand for his room. There's people lining up, hoping to claim his room for themselves. And I am very reluctant. And I suppose anybody who has experienced this will know what I'm going through, because I feel although he's not there, I want him to know that it is his place, and he always has a place to be in the house, in our home. So I'm very reluctant to let go of his room, because I just think that perhaps that message, would be tough for him to feel. So while they're lining up for the room, I'm reluctant to let it go. But that's just, I suppose, to emphasize a little bit about feeling that you're still part and you belong. When peace is present in the family, it overflows into church and into society. And when peace is absent, the wounds, as many of us know, can echo for generations. The church teaches us that the family is not just a social unit, but it's what the Second Vatican Council called the family, the domestic church. So what that really means is that the home is the first place where faith is lived, where love is learned, and peace is practiced, ideally. So when we're reflecting tonight, we're looking at peace in the family. I mean, what does that really mean? What truly is peace in the family? Why is it so fragile? And how, with God's grace, when there's an absence of it, it can be restored and sustained. And when we speak of peace, especially about homes and families, we often, our understanding is that it's about the absence of conflict. And for me, sometimes peace in the home means when the volume goes down, but that's not the real deep understanding of peace in the home, because real peace is rooted in love. It goes hand in hand with love. It cannot be there if there is no love. And in John's Gospel, Jesus tells us, "Peace I leave you, my peace I give you, a peace that the world cannot give." So peace is where Jesus is, where God is. And we say these words regularly at Mass, and maybe we just rattle them off sometimes. But the next time you're at Mass and we say those words around peace, really try and hear what's being said and take it on board. Because this understanding that does not mean that if Jesus is at the center of our lives and at the center of our homes, then we will be without struggles or challenges. What it means is that he is actually with us in the challenges and the struggles. As I mentioned, the Holy Family of Nazareth, we're not free from hardship at all. But because God was at the center of their lives, they were able to trust what was happening. And I'm sure it was really, really difficult for them in many different ways. But they trusted. And what an example Mary and Joseph were for us all in that trust in God. So I said at the beginning, I'm going to look at scripture, I suppose, and the Bible really is it's so full of families, as we know. It's full of stories of births. There's stories of infertility. There's love stories. There's deaths, murder. There's sibling rivalry, family crisis, and an awful lot of dysfunction at times. The very first pages in the Bible introduce us to Adam and Eve's family with all the burden of violence, but also highlights its enduring strength in Genesis 4. And the last pages of the Bible, we behold the wedding feast of the bride and the Lamb in the book of Revelation. In the New Testament, and particularly around the writings of St. Paul and the letters, we learn about churches that meet in homes, a living space that was turned into a domestic church, a setting for the Eucharist, the presence of Christ seated at the table. And the Bible also teaches us that the family was a place where children were brought up in the faith. And we see this in the celebration of the Passover, in particular in Exodus, where it says, "And when your children ask you, 'What does this ceremony mean to you?' then tell them, 'It is the Passover sacrifice to the Lord, who passed over the house of the Israelites in Egypt and spared our homes when he struck down the Egyptians.'" And again, similarly, in the book of Deuteronomy, it says, "When your son asks you, tell him," and so on. So the family in the Bible is a place where parents become the teachers in the faith. And in our families today, this is also true. It is passed on. The faith is passed on, and we hear that a lot. But recently I was at a gathering and the keynote speaker said something the opposite of that, really, in a way. He said, it's not passed on. It is lived out. And that's what I would see. I suppose if you understand it as just that faith is just something that is taught and not practiced or lived out, well, then really is it a real handing on? Is it really faith, or is it just a story, or is it just knowledge? So real faith in a family, I would say, really needs to be witnessed and lived out and not taught with just words. And I know that perhaps in the past, and still today, it's true that sometimes practicing our faith can become, something that we do in terms of maybe attending the sacraments and various things, but that maybe outside of those sacraments and our daily prayers, we don't actually live out our faith. And maybe we need to look a little bit more at that. Like, are we really witnessing what we say we believe? So in the joy of love, Pope Francis reminds us that Jesus himself was born into a modest family, a poor family, really, and that they soon had to flee to a foreign land. Jesus in Scripture visits the home of Peter, whose mother-in-law is ill, and he shows sympathy upon hearing the deaths in the homes of Jairus and Lazarus. He hears the desperate wailing of the widow of Nain for her dead son, and he heeds the plea of the father of an epileptic child in the small country town in Mark's Gospel. We see in Matthew and Luke that he goes to the homes of the tax collector, like Matthew and Zacchaeus. Jesus speaks to sinners, like the woman in the house of Simon the Pharisee in Luke's Gospel. Jesus knows the anxieties and the tensions experienced by families, and he weaves them into the parables. Children who leave home to seek adventure in the story of the prodigal son in Luke, or who prove troublesome in Matthew's Gospel, or who fall prey to violence in Mark's Gospel. Jesus is also very sensitive to the embarrassment that is caused by the lack of wine at the wedding feast in Cana, the failure of the guests to come to a banquet in Matthew, and the anxiety of a poor family over the loss of a coin. So in the Bible, These are examples, I suppose, of where the Word of God can be a source of comfort and companionship for every family that experiences difficulties or sufferings. And it is through that understanding that peace hopefully can come. Peace in the family today, in a broad sense, can be very difficult because we all face the many challenges that seem to be part of our everyday lives. Pope Francis often spoke about the culture of individualism, and we see that more and more. He also spoke of a disposable culture where everything is about me, and if it no longer serves my needs, I can just get rid of it. I can just throw it away. And sometimes this spills into relationships where people or family members in times of struggle or difficulty or challenges, they're just cut off. Their needs are not considered. There's huge stress on families around work, getting children from A to B to C to D. There's challenges around finances. People are worried about their own future and the future of their children. It's difficult to keep it all going. And this is something that I say a lot, but also I hear from many people around me that it is so difficult to keep it all going. In my work throughout the diocese, in the past year in particular, we had a series of meetings around the diocese where there was some consultation and people had an opportunity to speak about what they were experiencing in their parishes and in their faith lives. And something that came up in every single meeting was that many grandparents were there and they were extremely worried about the faith lives of their children, mostly their adult children and their grandchildren. Because to them, it seems that life has changed very, very rapidly and continues to change rapidly, and that faith no longer seems to be at the heart of the home, at the heart of the family. So they were genuinely concerned. But I would say that we are people of hope. We are people of the resurrection, and we must not despair. Because as well as being part of those meetings around the diocese, I also have every now and again a wonderful opportunity to work with children preparing for sacraments. And I recently met with children preparing for confirmation, so 6th class children in primary school. They were absolutely fabulous. And it does your heart good. Well, it certainly does my heart good anyway, because, work around faith and parish can be challenging at times. And as I pointed out, there are real challenges there. But when you come and gather with children who are preparing for sacraments, it's a life-giving experience. They carry so much in their little hearts, but they are so full of love. They have such an abundance of love. And we gathered recently and they were invited to write some prayers as part of a kind of a mini retreat that we had. And I was able to read the prayers that they had written. And many of them wrote prayers about their kind and loving parents, their kind and loving grandparents, their kind and loving aunts and uncles. And they named particular people. Many of them, of course, prayed for their little pets at home, and they were asking God to look after all these people and their little animals as well. I met with children preparing for First Holy Communion as well, and their approach, I suppose, is so simplistic. Their understanding of God is so simple and kind of straightforward. And they trust in a way that I think as adults we could really learn from. One time, I think it was maybe about 2 years ago, I met with a group of First Holy Communion children, and I was doing a Godly Play story, which I was telling them the story of the Great Flood. So all about Noah and the ark and the animals. And as part of Godly Play, after the story, the children have some wondering time. So one of the questions I asked them was, what part of the story did you like the best? And I always remember what this little child said. I don't know why. Lots of times they say the most profound things. They're so spiritual, really. This little child said, in relation to the story of the Great Flood, he said, I liked the part where they were all in the ark together and they were not afraid because God was with them. So I just think that's such a simple way of understanding. That little child knew, was able to see that the presence of God would get them through. So again, I suppose it's just helpful to hear what the children say. So the Lord's presence dwells in real and concrete families with the daily troubles, struggles, joys, and hopes. And Francis reminds us that the spirituality of family life is made up of thousands of small but real gestures. God dwells here in those thousands of small and real gestures. And this is where the human and the divine come together. God dwells there. We see, as I've mentioned already, some of the parables. This is where I suppose Jesus teaches us of all these small gestures. The mustard seed, the lost coin, the lost sheep, where one is as important as 100. In the parables and in the stories in the gospel, we see that no one is excluded from the table, that everyone is welcome, and those who leave are always welcomed back. We can see ourselves and the stories of our family lives in these parables and in these gospel stories. We are told in the joy of love that if a family is centered on Christ, he will unify and illumine its entire life, that moments of pain and difficulty will be experienced in the union of the Lord's cross, and his closeness will make it possible to surmount them. I wanted to say a word about forgiveness, because no family can have peace without forgiveness. And it is very easy to say that, but it is very difficult to actually forgive and to practice forgiveness, I suppose, especially if it is a wound that has been passed on, sometimes from generations. There's also a need for us to be able to forgive ourselves for whatever we have done or not done. And I know that as a parent, I have made several mistakes terrible mistakes that I regret. But I believe that maybe, I tell myself anyway, that I did the best that I could at that particular moment. Maybe whatever resources I had at that time, or wherever my heart or my head was at that time, I made a decision. But I think also acknowledging that we sometimes get it wrong. I suppose I'm speaking as a parent and also as a wife, that sometimes we get it wrong. We say the wrong thing, we do the wrong thing, but it is never too late to say sorry, to ask for forgiveness. And the example of the prodigal son teaches us that very thing, that it is never too late to go home, to go back, and to ask for forgiveness. The prodigal son story demonstrates that the door is always open, that there's always a way back, that when we have been offended or let down, that forgiveness is possible and desirable, but it's not easy. Pope Francis tells us that family communion can only be preserved and perfected through a great spirit of sacrifice. When we have been offended and let down, that's, as I say, it's easy to say we must forgive or ask for forgiveness. It is very difficult to do it. But there is no family that doesn't know or have experienced selfishness or tension or conflict, which causes great division in family life. We recognize that being able to forgive others also implies a liberating experience of understanding. Often our mistakes or criticism we have received from loved ones can affect our own self-esteem. We become distant from others, perhaps avoiding affection and fearful in our relationships, blaming others for what has happened. One way through this is to learn to pray over our past history, to accept ourselves, to forgive ourselves, and to learn how to live with our own limitations and have this same attitude towards others. Forgiveness in a family and forgiveness in the home is choosing love and peace over resentment and healing over bitterness. So just a word about sacraments. I think getting ready for Mass, I suppose speaking about the sacrament of the Eucharist, getting ready for Mass with a family, for young children in particular, I suppose, can be very chaotic. But also for all of us, there is a need for us to take our time, I suppose. I have had so many experiences over the years where getting ready for Mass has just been so stressful and trying to get everybody out. And I learned that, I suppose, when my children were young, that I had to get organized very early in the weekend. So things that I would perhaps leave till Sunday, I would try and get done on Saturday or Friday so that we could kind of free up this time. And I suppose, placing the importance on Mass within the family is really important. And if that's chaotic and everybody's shouting and fighting and looking for things on the way out the door, it doesn't really lend itself to what it's all about. It's just a stressful thing for everybody. So gathering for Mass and in our parish and in our pastoral areas begins at home, really. And earlier in that day or earlier in that morning, that's when you begin to get ready to communicate, I suppose, to everybody that something important is happening and we are going to be part of that. So it needs a little bit of time. Praying together is the foundation stone in our own family. I prayed with my children when they were in the womb, and which was a strange experience at the time. I was a lot younger, I suppose, when I was pregnant with my first child. But I remember, I remember very clearly praying with him. I didn't know he was a him then, but I prayed with him when he was in the womb. And we also prayed the rosary at night time. When they were very little, I would often, my husband and I, we say we had the secret to how to get the children to sleep. So sometimes at night we pop them into their beds and then I might sit on the stairs or nearby and say the rosary. And they would fall asleep. The rhythm of the prayers and the mantra, I suppose, of the rosary soothed them and let them fall asleep. And then as they got a little bit older, we would invite them to say a little decade each, of which they love to do as well. We pray night prayers with the children still, and we pray in the car. So I try and bring God into every aspect of our life, wherever we're going or whatever we're doing. I would say in my house, I have a few, not huge or anything like that, but a few religious paintings. We have crosses in most of the rooms. The children have religious medals under their mattresses, and I would have introduced them to their guardian angels at a very young age. So trying to bring Christ into the center of the home again. My older children now, I suppose things change, as you know, but as they go out into the world, I have to let them go. And I hope that they'll do the right thing like any parent. But I always encourage them. I say to them, stay close to God, which is something that, again, we use in Godly Place. So we say, stay close to God. We say grace before meals, and I have told them Bible stories, I suppose, when they were little, especially using Godly Play. And sometimes we just read from the Bible, a children's Bible. We make a May altar in our house. We hang the St. Bridget's cross. I make a bit of a fuss about the crib at Christmas, and I always encourage the children to have a little sacred space in their rooms. It might be something as simple as a little battery tea light with some rosary beads or a little cross or something like that. And sometimes their granny or cousin or somebody might have brought holy water and they might have that. And it's been quite funny because over the years, and I'd be tucking the kids into bed or something, and you see the little sacred space, and occasionally a random item might find its way in, like a little toy from McDonald's or a little dinky car or something like that. But all of it was kind of, just part of their little sacred world. So it always made me smile, and it still does to this day. I said at the outset, I'm not I think I said anyway that I'm not an expert on family. I'm just speaking, I suppose, from my experience of family and some of these things that I have done, and my husband as well. It's not just me, certainly. Um, they've helped us in our home, and they've helped us to make Christ at the center of our home, which I hope in many ways brings that sense of peace and acknowledging that we are a Christian family and this is where we are basing our, our hope and our trust in the Lord. I think I'm almost out of time. In fact, I think I'm sorry, I may have gone over a little bit. I just want to finish with this quote from Pope Francis. And again, I suppose I'm using Pope Francis's document, but Pope Leo has spoke extensively about peace. In fact, that was the first things he said when he came up to meet the people in after he was named as our new Pope. And so I'm conscious that I am using Pope Francis, but it's primarily because of this document on the family. But he said, he wrote rather in The Joy of Love, this, I think, this beautiful quote where he said, I thank God that many families, which are far from considering themselves perfect, live in love, fulfill their calling and keep moving forward, even if they fall many times along the way. There is no stereotype of the ideal family, but rather a challenging mosaic made up of many different realities with all their joys, hopes, and problems. And I think that this is where most of us are as families and as people. We are far from perfect, but we keep going. We keep moving forward. We are a challenging mosaic made up of many different parts and bits and pieces. No two families are the same or experience the same challenges, hopes and problems, joys and sorrows. But we live in love, and the Lord's presence dwells in real and concrete families. Thank you.
Thank you to you, Gemma. That was absolutely amazing. We've had lots of questions and lots of ideas to put to you. But I think, first of all, I'd like to say the amount of people who have written in here tonight to say how inspiring and what a beautiful, calm, and serene presence you are. It was lovely to see it because it was true. Really, you had some wonderful things to tell us there tonight. It was really lovely. I think something that struck me was that idea that, trust can come easily to children, and as we grow older, we forget it. But that sometimes they can remind us that trusting in God is not that difficult if we allow ourselves to do so. So the first question I'm going to put to you is to do with kind of activities and busy family lives that very often people find on a Sunday morning. There is practice for this and there is training for that. And how do we work around that? And how do we manage to allow ourselves the time to get our family to Mass together?
Yeah, that is something that I'm asked all the time, and it comes up regularly. Um, and Colette said at the beginning that I live in Tullaroan parish, and anyone that has heard of Tommy Welsh or Grace Welsh or Pádraig Welsh, the Kilkenny hurlers, they're from Tullaroan. So we live in a very strong hurling parish. And I was very lucky when we moved there originally. That there was a lot of young people and young families went to Mass, so there were great role models for my children to see Kilkenny hurlers at Mass. It was a great start, but it is really difficult because my youngest child plays rugby, and rugby training is on Sunday morning. My daughter is musical and has been preparing for a musical for the last few months, and that's on Sunday morning. And the others are all involved in GAA and everything, and it's on all the time. But we've never missed Mass because I think there are 99 Masses in our diocese every Saturday night or Sunday morning. So it's difficult to maybe go in your own parish every week, but you just have to work around it a little bit. And sometimes, unfortunately, we split up as a family. but that's because of different ages and whatever. But we never miss mass, and we find a way. So if we're going on a Sunday, we like to a match or whatever, we'll try to get on the Saturday night. So it takes a bit of planning, and I suppose the other side of it is that there's a choice there as well. We make the choice that we're going to go to mass, whether it's in our parish or not. I think where it can be a little bit difficult is where you have, children who are involved in the liturgy or want to be involved in the liturgy, and they're not able to maybe in their own parish or pastoral area. But I think there is a choice around it, and I think it is possible, but it is a challenge. But if it's not sport or activities, it'll be something else. So we're always going to have to overcome these challenges. So there's a choice there, and you're making that choice for you and your family, and you're saying what's important.
Yeah, that's very true. It is about planning ahead, and we have to plan for a lot of things, I suppose, in our days. As you said earlier about the juggling between, okay, who's collecting them, who's dropping them this morning. So yeah, there's always a little bit of a juggle. So we can juggle maths as well, into that little timetable for ourselves. Another question that came up was, are there any resources, for example, like books or courses or loving rituals, um, that you'd recommend for families to use?
Okay, that's an interesting one. There are lots of resources out there. I think each diocese probably has their own resources that you can access through. I would start by maybe going on to diocesan websites or getting in touch with your pastoral centres if you like. Obviously, you have one in Kerry.
Mhm.
Um, and there's usually resources come out at certain times of the year as well, during Lent and Advent and things like that. A lot of resources go to schools as well, but there's a link with the home. So, for example, I know Trócaire, which is like the Lenten campaign for Trócaire beginning next week. They have resources for families, and
Mhm.
they have resources for schools, but they have particular ones for homes as well, and families. Um, I suppose it's just, I suppose you can go online and look up different things. Certain things I would have used over the years, and I still have them, is a lovely way to start with children and stories of faith is kind of look at the lives of saints, and there's a new book actually quite recently. I can't think of the name of it now, but it's all about saints, but it's much more recent. It's a kind of a modern version.
Yeah.
But some of the saints' lives are fascinating, and some of them are off the wall. So there's children are often very interested in learning about them. But I maybe check with your own each diocese, I suppose, or even in your
Yeah.
parish. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's some great resources online, certainly, and as you say, the Trócaire website is great as well. You'll find things there. Um, you mentioned godly play a couple of times, and a couple of people have asked, what exactly is godly play? Could you tell us, please?
I can. I'll probably do a very bad job of describing it exactly, but I suppose really it's a way of connecting. It's a way of teaching and connecting with children and adults. I've used it with adults as well, through Bible stories. So I know, before I forget, I know that it's in Tralee Parish, and I think it's in Scariff, and it's in another parish as well, which I can't remember the name of, but it Godly Play is alive and well in Kerry Diocese. So
Good.
basically, it uses various materials in a kind of a Montessori way, I suppose. That's one of the foundations
Mhm.
of that teaching. So children would gather, we'd sit on the floor, and we build a circle, and then we tell them this story, a Bible story, or a story around sacraments, or it could be a saint story or whatever. And so they have the story. And then it's done through, as I say, using different materials. So one of my favorite stories is The Great Family. So we use tiny little figures, and which are beautifully handmade, and sand and the desert. And you tell this
Mm.
story. After the story, there's an opportunity where the children would do something called wondering. So I wonder what was the most important part of the story. I wonder where you think you are in this story, and that kind of thing. And they engage in this way. And then we have a response time. So they will use various materials to draw or paint a picture or write something, or make something, and then afterwards, then you have a feast. So they'll have a little cup of juice and a little snack or something like that. And we kind of bring it together through prayer and thanks. And so they have this wonderful experience of coming together. You know, it mirrors church and mass in a way that way. So you have all the gathering, the listening, the sharing, all of that. So there's a Godly Play Ireland website that if anybody's interested can go on to. And there's even opportunities for training every year to train as a Godly Play storyteller. So yeah, I absolutely love Godly Play, and I've used it with adults in a parish. I've used it with children, usually for children who are praying for sacraments, but it's for everyone.
Yeah, that sounds fantastic. One last question. What a couple of people have asked, like, what can we do to heal differences in our families? You know, if we feel we're triggered by somebody, or if there's already a division there, what small steps can we take maybe to try to heal that division or to stop ourselves from being triggered by somebody's words towards us, maybe, or their actions?
Well, it's really hard to, I
It's a
suppose.
huge question, yes.
I suppose, you know, I myself in my own family, the family I was born into more so than my current children and husband family, I have experienced that as everybody has. And you know, particularly my mother died a number of years ago, and the family kind of became very fragmented afterwards, and it was kind of through no fault of anyone in particular. It just things happened, and I find sometimes that, you know, when people get upset about something, they tend to bring up things that happened when they were children or unresolved things from years ago and all of that. And things can escalate very quickly. But for me, I suppose I can only speak from my experience. It is really, really difficult when you are hurt or have been hurt by somebody. Especially, I think you're mostly hurt by people you love. Because if you didn't care about them, it wouldn't bother you. And, you know, like if a stranger said something to you, you probably wouldn't mean as much. But when it's somebody you love, it can really hurt. I would say the first thing I would do, I suppose, is start to pray about it and ask God to help and to bridge that gap, and try and find a way to forgive, to just learn to let it go. Because I think the hardest thing about hurt like that is that, you know, we've all been told this. I'm not a psychologist, but, you know, we've all been told that holding on to pain and hurt and a lack of forgiveness does more damage to us and can make us sick and us, you know, be completely without peace because you're holding on to something. And really, at the end of the day, I suppose, you know, if you know, how would you feel if you just let it go? Imagine how if you did let it go. And so I'm not really answering this very well, but from my own experience, I suppose I've always kind of felt I need to let it go. I've always kind of gone back to that place where I have to let it go, forgive. It doesn't mean that you have to, you know, be a victim of that person in any way or allow yourself to be hurt again. But you'll become free if you can forgive them and let them off, you know. I hope that.
Thank you. No, that's so true. It is. And thank you for everything this evening. It's been wonderful. And as I say, the compliments here are flying in to say thank you to you for your lovely talk tonight. So I'm going to hand back now to Colette.
Thank you again, Gemma, and thank you, Ailish. And I think the engagement tonight is very reflective of the subject matter. And as I said earlier, a half an hour is just not enough. But now I'm delighted to welcome and invite Bishop Ray as we're coming to a close in our mission to say his words. Thank you, Bishop Ray. You're most welcome.
Good evening all. So, just to say a few simple things, and surely the first thing is a word of appreciation and thanks. Thanks to all involved over the past 4 days and all involved in the planning. Thanks to all at the Pastoral Centre, their great work. Thanks to the speakers on radio and here. Thanks to Gemma tonight. And to all who have participated in the various parts of the mission. It's just good to appreciate and say thanks. It's been a good 4 nights and very different, worthwhile. So just thanks. Secondly, just to mention that a great thing about online, besides the fact that Gemma could speak from her home and no driving, and yet speak to maybe 500, 600, 700. But the talks in other parts are also available online. They'll be on the Diocesan website for at least a few weeks. So I encourage you, if you missed one or want to hear one a second time, and to encourage others. If everybody tuned in, got one other person to look at some piece, listen to some piece on the Diocesan website, wouldn't that be wonderful? So to encourage others. That's my second point. The third point, one thing that has delighted me about the 4 nights, listening to the talks, listening to the questions, is the detailed questions each night. People ask questions, and I think this is what Pope Francis and now Pope Leo asks of us all. They're saying to us, listen well, be interested, think it through what you hear, discuss it with others, speak up, ask questions. Because what Pope Francis and Pope Leo want is that for more and more people to find their voice in the church, in the diocese, in the parish, in any grouping come together around faith. More and more to find their voice and thus have a voice to participate fully in the life of the church. All voices heard, all voices count. That's what Pope Francis had been asking for the last 5 years, and Leo continues it. And I suppose the simple phrase they use is, be a synodal church, be a synodal people of God. And so I was delighted to see, you can see it coming through in so many aspects of the online mission. So finally then, a reflection and a blessing. And just to finish, recall the words on the cover of the booklet. It's here in front of me. On the booklet, peace be to you all. Peace be to you all. It's the words of Jesus risen from the dead. After he rose, the words Jesus spoke to his disciples, peace be with you. Especially he said it in that his situation where Thomas first doubted and then Thomas had the great faith. But just to say, these words are not just history. It's not something wonderful Jesus said back then. If you think about it, at Mass, with Jesus Christ, the bread of life, on the altar, the greeting, the peace greeting says, peace be with you. What is that? That is, through the priest, that greeting comes from Jesus Christ himself. The bread of life says to each of us, peace be with you. And it's not just words, it's an outpouring of grace. Jesus Christ's presence to us is always a source of peace. We can always find peace in Jesus Christ. We only have to turn to him in our hearts. So just, if the one thing you remember from the mission is, peace be with you, peace be to you all. That's God with us, saying, when you lack peace, when you're disturbed, turn to me and you'll find peace. So this night, as our online mission concludes, I bless you all with the blessing of Jesus Christ. That simple blessing, peace be to you all. Peace be to you all, to your families, to your loved ones, to your homes. Peace be to you all, the peace of Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.